Well, hello again, everybody. We are back with another chapter in the book of Esther as we continue studying this fascinating story. I hope everyone is doing well. Before we get started, don't forget, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to this channel, hit that little bell icon, and you'll get notified when a new video is published. I know some of you are doing that. Some of you may not be doing that, but if I forget to let you know, those of you that I contact to let you know a new video has been released. If I forget and you miss one, then I feel bad. So be sure and hit that bell icon, and that way you'll get notified. You won't miss any episodes. So we are in Esther chapter 6 today. We're continuing this story, this battle between Mordecai and Haman, and the queen has a secret that she's trying to tell the king, or trying to figure out how not to tell him, and she's struggling with that dilemma. And there's a lot going on in the book of Esther. But in chapter 6, it says, that night the king had trouble sleeping. So this is the night after the first banquet with Queen Esther. He had trouble sleeping. So this is probably late night, maybe really early morning. I don't know about y'all, but I have trouble sleeping sometimes. Sometimes I'll wake up multiple times during the night. Sometimes I'll wake up and I'll have to get up and go in the living room and read or do something, because I just can't go back to sleep. And eventually my eyes will get sleepy enough and I can get back in bed and go back to sleep. But insomnia is not a modern day problem. Apparently it happened in Bible times as well. And so the king is having trouble sleeping. So he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. This is the book of the Chronicles of the king. Basically, it's like a daily report of everything that happened in the kingdom each day, or each week, or each month, however they did it. But it was a history of what happened during the reign of this king and that king. And it says in verse 2, excuse me, in those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. And you remember that back in chapter 2 or chapter 3, somewhere in there, that Mordecai had overheard them plotting to assassinate the king. And he told his contact in the palace, who then told the queen, who then told the king in the name of Mordecai. They questioned these doorkeepers, got the truth out of them. Yes, they were going to assassinate King Xerxes, and they were sentenced to be hanged. And of course, again, hanging back then is not what we think about hanging. Hanging was being impaled on a sharp stick and just being left there to die. So the eunuch the servant had read the account of that, and it brought it back to memory of the king. And the king asked in verse 3, what reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? What did we do for him? He saved the king's life. We must have done something. And his attendants replied, nothing has been done for him. And so the king is like, well, no, that's not good. We got to reward this guy. So he says, who is in the outer court? Who's here? Who's here that I can talk to? And as it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole that he had prepared. Okay, remember, because this Mordecai has just become a thorn in his side. And his wife and his family said, hey, why don't you go to the king and ask to impale Mordecai on that pole that you made? So he was fixing to ask the king if he could do that. So the attendant said, Haman is out in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? Well, now Haman is thinking, who is the greatest person in the kingdom that the king would want to honor? It's got to be me. It's got to be me. He promoted me to second in command right under him. I have the run of the palace. I was invited to a banquet with him and the queen. We were the only two in attendance besides the queen. I mean, who is the greatest man in this kingdom other than the king? It's got to be me. So his mind is racing. His mind is thinking, what would I want? What would I desire? as I was studying this, I was recalled that my family, my birth family, my brothers and sisters, nieces, nephews, and all, we always have a Christmas party every year, and there's always a gift exchange. And some people call it a Chinese gift exchange, some people call it a white elephant gift exchange. But basically, everybody brings a gift. Everybody draws numbers. Number one goes up and grabs a present and opens it. Number two then has the option of grabbing a present and opening it, or taking number one's present if they just want that present. And then number one would have to go get another present. So we do that at my family Christmas parties. And when my dad was alive, he would always bring a present that he wanted. He would find something that he wanted, and he'd bring that as a present. And then he would manipulate and get his wife to manipulate so that he could get it. You know, if he had to steal it from somebody, or if his turn was over with, then he'd get somebody to steal it for him. And so one year he had this present that he wanted, and he didn't get it. He didn't walk out the door with it. He got so mad, he actually left the party early, and he never came to another Christmas party. And my brothers and my sisters and I and the rest of the family, we laugh about that every year, thinking about that. But this is what Haman's doing here. He's thinking, what would I want? What would I want? How would I want the king to honor me? So he says, well, if the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, one that you've worn, and a horse that you have ridden yourself, with a golden bridle and a royal emblem on its head. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse, and have the official shout as they go, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." So Haman's thinking, that's what I would want. That would be cool, you know. And he can already taste it almost. King thinks about it, and he says, that's a good idea, Haman. He says, excellent. Quick, take the robes and my horse, and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested. Don't miss a thing. Now, Haman, that doesn't record this, but you know Haman's first initial reaction was, what? Mordecai, my mortal enemy, the man who is a thorn in my side, I have to do this for him, and you want to honor him more than me? And not only do you want to honor him, but you want me to parade him through the city square and say all these things about him? You have got to be kidding. But verse 11 says, so Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square, shouting, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. And every one of those words probably stuck in his craw. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. Poor baby. When Haman told his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him. Now, wiser words were never spoken. And you know, even though God's not mentioning this, you know God is telling them this. God can operate in the lives of unsaved people. God can operate in the lives of pagan idol worshipers. If Haman had just taken their advice, the rest of the story would be much different. But he didn't take their advice. And verse 14 says, while they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly took Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. Because remember, she said, come back for a second banquet. And she said, she told the king, I'll tell you what I want. I'll tell you what I'm preparing you for, in other words. So again, God can work in the lives of pagan people. God's not mentioned in this book, but you see him. the servant that grabbed the chronicles of the book of the king didn't just happen to grab that particular scroll. That was God. He didn't just happen to start reading that story about Mordecai. That was God. Haman's wife and advisor didn't just come up with this warning on their own. That was God. So if you read this story with an eye to what God does behind the scenes, you see God in almost every chapter. So let's go on to chapter 7 and see what happens. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. It's the second banquet, remember. And on this second occasion, while they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." The king loves Esther very, very, very much. And she is the love of his life. And he says, even if you want half the kingdom, I'll give it to you. And Queen Esther replies, "If I have found favor with the king," which we know she has, "and if it pleases the king to grant my request," which he's already said he would, "I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king." Well, the king is horrified at this. He's surprised. He says, "Who would do such a thing?" King Xerxes demanded. "Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you, the queen?" Now remember, nobody knows she's a Jew. Not even Haman knew she was a Jew. Esther replied, "This wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy." I wish I could have been there to see that. He probably choked on his wine. His eyes probably got, really big. He probably started sweating, maybe heart palpitations. I don't know, but I wish I could have been a fly on the wall at that time. It says here that Haman grew pale with fright before the king and the queen. And then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. Okay. He went out there to cool off. He said, "Okay, I got to cool off. And I'm not going to react the way I want to react right now. Because if I react the way I want to react right now, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill him." So king is out there on the balcony, out there in the palace garden, and Haman stays behind to plead for his life with the queen. And again, he doesn't know she's a Jew yet, but he knew that the king intended to kill him. And in despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, because they didn't sit in chairs. They reclined on pillows or on a couch, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. And so you can see this being played out. The king walks in from the garden. He sees Haman laying across Queen Esther's body. And the king exclaims, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. So probably put a bag over his head or something like that. And that was a sign that this man had been arrested. He was doomed for execution. But if it wasn't so serious, it would be comical, this scene as it played out. Then it says, Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination." Well, now this is just icing on the cake. Not only did he want to kill the Queen Esther and her people, but he also wanted to kill the man that saved the king's life. The king said, "Then impale Haman on it." Yes. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. So Haman is out of the picture now. Okay, he's gone. The birds have plucked out his eyes. He's gone. He's out of the picture. His part is done in this little story. But chapter 7 says, on that same day, King Xerxes gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. All right. So he says here, everything Haman had, his servants, his money, his possessions, his animals, everything he had is yours. Gave it to the queen. Then Mordecai was brought before the queen because Esther had told the king how they were related. She said, look, I'm a Jew. Mordecai's a Jew. He raised me. He's the only father I've ever known. He's a Jew. I'm a Jew. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. I get chills every time I read this. I'm just like, yeah. You know, we love stories where good triumphs over evil, and the bad guy, gets what he deserves, and the good guy gets all these rewards. And that's what's happening here. Haman is now, he now has the king's signet ring. He is now has Haman's job. Okay. He's second in command to the king, and he's in charge of everything that Haman owned. Then Esther went again before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop the evil plot devised by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. Remember, he was going to assassinate them all on a certain day. And again, the king held out the gold scepter to Esther. So she rose and stood before him. And Esther said, if it please the king, and if I found favor with him, and if he thinks it's right, and if I'm pleasing to him, let there be a decree that reverses the orders of Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, who ordered that the Jews throughout all the king's provinces should be destroyed. For how can I endure to see my people and my family slaughtered and destroyed? Now, you remember, there's a problem with this, and we're going to get to it in just a second. Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, the Jew, I have given Esther the property of Haman, and he has been impaled on a pole because he tried to destroy the Jews. Now go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want, and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever has already been written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring can never be revoked. They can't repeal this law. They can't revoke it. They can't alter it. They can't change it. It's there. It's going to happen. There's no way they can stop it. So on June 25th, the king's secretaries were summoned, and a decree was written exactly as Mordecai dictated. It was sent to the Jews and to the highest officers, the governors and the nobles of all the 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. You look at a map, that's a big kingdom. The decree was written in the scripts and languages of all the peoples of the empire, including that of the Jews. And the decree was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. Mordecai sent the dispatches by swift messengers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king's service. And the king's decree gave the Jews in every city authority to unite to defend their lives. They were allowed to kill, slaughter, and annihilate anyone of any nationality or province who might attack them or their children and wives and take the property of their enemies. The day chosen for this event throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes was March 7th of the next year. That's the same day that the annihilation of the Jews was to take place. So now the annihilation is still going to go forward. It's the soldiers, the guards, the mercenaries, they're all going to go out and try to kill the Jews. But now the Jews can protect themselves. They can defend themselves, and they can kill anybody without fear of punishment who tries to kill them or any of their family. So a copy of this decree was to be issued as law in every province and proclaimed to all peoples so that the Jews would be ready to take revenge on their enemies on the appointed day. So urged on by the king's command, the messengers rode out swiftly on fast horses bred for the king's service, and the same decree was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. Then Mordecai left the king's presence, wearing the royal robe of blue and white, the great crown of gold, and an outer cloak of fine linen and purple. And the people of Susa celebrated the new decree. Nobody wanted the Jews to die. The Jews were very well respected and well liked in the kingdom, and especially in the capital city. The Jews were filled with joy and gladness, and they were honored everywhere. In every province and every city, wherever the king's decree arrived, the Jews rejoiced and had a great celebration, and declared a public festival and holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews themselves, for they feared what the Jews might do to them. So the people are seeing that the Jews have an advantage. There's something about the Jews. Everything always works out for them. They always come out on top, and people are thinking, man, I want to be a Jew. I want to get in on that gig. And so it says many of the people of the land became Jews themselves. And so in a way, this was a revival. Okay. A lot of pagan worshipers, idol worshipers became Jews because they saw that there was something different about the Jews. And it's the same way today. If people see there's something different about us as Christians, they're going to get curious and they're going to start asking questions, and then they're possibly going to become a Christian themselves. But if we act the same way that they act when things go wrong, or when we get that bad medical diagnosis, or anything adverse comes into our life, and we act the same way they do, they're not going to see a difference, and they're going to think, well, why should I be a Christian? Because they act just like I do. Folks, we have to act different. We have to be different. God said, come out from among them. He says, be holy as I am holy. We have to show the world there is a better way. And we have to show the world that God is going to take care of his children. But you got to be one of his children in order for him to take care of you. And so this was chapter 6 and 7 of Esther. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. There are 10 chapters, so hopefully next week we'll get through 8, 9, and 10 and finish up this book. And the story is just really getting good. The really, really exciting part is over with, but there's still another really good part coming. I hope you're enjoying this study. I hope you're getting something out of it besides just, spending 30 minutes listening to me drone on. And if you're enjoying it, drop me a comment, let me know. Make sure you like and subscribe, hit that little bell icon. And I'm already working on what we're going to do after we finish the book of Esther. And so pray for me as I seek God's guidance and God's will for this ministry. And until we meet next week, God bless.